Welcome to the Politics of Survival. I'm your host, Tara Reade, and what a week it's been. The inauguration of President Vladimir Putin. He had an 86% approval rating, and the inauguration was quite beautiful to watch. It was really something. And also, Victory Day was today, as I'm recording this, and this will be released on Friday, so you'll see it then. So a lot's been happening. And I wanted to share with you about Victory Day, how glorious that was. It was really, and I'm wearing my little Ura, my pin here. So yeah, that's my favorite part. The way Russians say hurrah or hooray is Ura. And I think that's very cool. So anyway, Victory Day is to commemorate, and it's also a solemn day for what happened with the Great Patriotic War. It's been 79 years, and since that had happened, and of course, there's been a lot of coverage of that with RT, and I'd recommend that you hop over to RT and check out the beautiful coverage of Victory Day, because there was quite a display, and you really felt the emotions and the mood of the people in Moscow were very united and very positive. The economy is going really well here in Moscow, Russia, and in Russia in general. And there's a lot of innovation, a lot of opportunities, and people are feeling very united behind their leaders and happy with what they're seeing. Quite a stark contrast to what's happening in the United States and other European countries that have neglected their citizens and invested just in war constantly. So that's that. But I have a guest on to talk about a little bit of history that's really interesting. And he'll get more into that. And he's quite in a position to discuss it. But before I do that, I wanted to mention to you, of course, I appreciate all your comments and new subscribers and new followers that have come forward since the Tucker Carlson interview aired. Last night, he had met with me in Moscow, Russia, some months ago and recorded an interview about my experiences and about how I was doing and what was going on with my case. And as you all know, I'm suing the DOJ and FBI, and there's been quite a weaponization of the by the DOJ, and politicized by the Biden administration. So Biden's really come after me. So that lawsuit is moving forward. The only news I have on that is a FOIA request that I had made. The FBI sent back a letter saying they've reviewed the request for the FOIA and are analyzing it. So yeah, my goal is, as I talked about with Tucker Carlson, is to get my FBI files, the wiretaps, all the illegal surveillance, and have it expunged and get damages for how badly they treated me and the fact that I had to live in another country out of fear, simply for coming forward about the truth about Joe Biden. I didn't commit a crime. I didn't do anything wrong. I shouldn't be under sanctions, nothing like that. But here we go. So for all of that, I'm quite grateful. And I was on RT today. As you all know, I've been working with them and for several years, but also now while I'm here in Russia, I'm working for them. And as a geopolitical analyst, a contributor, they never tell me what to say or what to think. They really are accepting of any analysis that I give. And I really appreciate that. I have a lot of freedom, a lot of creative freedom working for them. And that's a wonderful thing. That said, the interview with Tucker Carlson was over an hour. Only 23 minutes are aired, but it's really an important 23 minutes, and I hope you all enjoy it. So we'll have links and we'll have ways for you to watch that. But now I want to talk about my guest. The guest I have is really interesting. He has, it was such a great conversation. He was a former CIA analyst and former counter-terrorist. He became quite disenchanted with the CIA and, with his work with the federal government and the way our foreign policy was so egregious to other countries and harming citizens. And he talks a lot about that. And we covered every topic under the sun as far as that goes. And he really is insightful. So Larry Johnson is my guest tonight, and he will be talking about his experiences working with the CIA, working with counterterrorism, and then, what's happening now, and his analysis of what's going on with all these war fronts that the Biden administration has, basically gotten us into. He's also quite critical of the intelligence services, and you might be surprised what he has to say about it. So stay tuned and help me welcome and watch and ask your questions. And I love your comments. Larry Johnson, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Larry, thank you so much for joining the Politics of Survival. My audience is so intrigued by the work that you do. We've had other, I would say, whistleblowers. We've had Kyle Seraphin, a whistleblower for the FBI, on. He was a former FBI agent who's now brought to light some of the corruption that he saw, and is really struggling because he's been really a target because of his outspokenness. But he brought forward a lot of things that the FBI were doing to Americans that they didn't know. And then, of course, I know Ray McGovern, and he was on the UN Security Council and talked about the proxy war the U.S. and NATO is fighting in Ukraine against Russia. And I know he's a good colleague, friend of yours, former colleague, perhaps. But you were a former CIA analyst, so my audience may not know anything about you. So I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about your background and how that morphed into you changing your views.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I've, but I guess you could say I have changed my views, because I always try to look at all available evidence and assess it honestly. Without bringing my own personal prejudices to the table. So I joined the CIA in 1985. I spent the first year in what was called the Career Trainee Program. I had a classmate by the name of Valerie Wilson at the time, Valerie Plame. I only knew her as Valerie P, because all of us in this class were undercover.
Right.
So we were not to know each other's real identities from the outset. But I was fortunate at the last month of that year-long orientation. I went through the new analyst course, and it was taught by a fellow named George Allen. George Allen had been the division chief of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War in 1967-68. And actually, it started in 66 with him. And so he had faced the pressure to lie about the intelligence. And he recounted to us how, he was a senior manager. He had two kids in college, or two kids in high school getting ready to go to college. And he was getting phone calls from Secretary of Defense McNamara, the director of the National Security Council, McGeorge Bundy, and even Lyndon Johnson, the president, calling him up, said, "Hey, why aren't you being a team player?" Because they were pressuring him to say that there were not as many Viet Cong guerrillas, that the U.S. was winning the war in Vietnam. Now, George had an analyst that worked for him by the name of Sam Adams. And, for those who are not in America, Sam Adams is the name of a longtime American patriot, and this Sam Adams was a descendant of his. It's also a name for a beer.
It's a really good beer. Yeah, but anyway, go on. Samuel Adams, mini barbecues and bonfires. Samuel Adams, yes, go on.
But, Sam Adams was wealthy. They had can we use obscenities on this channel?
Yes. This is yes.
Okay, well, it was called "fuck you" money. In other words, people would come after you, and you had enough money, you could walk away and say, "I don't care what you say."
Yeah.
So what George told us and imbued in me as a young analyst was, he said, "I regret to this day that I didn't stand up as forcefully as I should have back then, because I allowed my own fears about my family's welfare to take precedence." And I took that to heart, and it was good advice, because shortly thereafter, I was I went in as a conservative Republican. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
A
Okay.
supporter of Ronald Reagan.
Mhm.
And yet I saw my job as trying to be as accurate and correctly reflecting the intelligence.
Mhm.
And I saw very quickly that there was a clear divergence between what the intelligence said and what was the policy voice coming out of the White House.
Right.
And it was also coming out of the Directorate of Operations. Now, I was fortunate during that year orientation in the career trainee program that I had served a 2-month internship on the Central American Task Force. That was the operations side of the house. So I
Mhm.
knew the operators, I knew how the operations were planned. I knew I got a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And so my 4-year, then 3 more years at the CIA, I learned very quickly how the Directorate of Operations was known to lie and misrepresent what was going on if they were involved with a covert action that had a high policy priority.
Mhm.
I left the CIA in disgust after I was informed that they had questions about the integrity of my analysis. And all of that boiled down to the fact that I was asked every morning to prepare a list of cables that the front office should see. This was back in the day of paper.
Sure.
We weren't
Yeah.
doing,
That was the old
weren't doing
times. Yeah.
weren't doing electronic messaging. And unbeknownst to me, my branch chief, a woman named Mary McCarthy, who subsequently got fired from the CIA for leaking information, she was sending forward her own list of cables. Now, Mary came out of a background in Africa,
Mhm.
knew nothing about Central America.
Okay.
I'd lived in Central America. I spoke Spanish. I knew,
Mhm.
and I'd been on this account for a while. And the front office, instead of, they said there was a discrepancy. Her
Right.
storyline was not the same as mine. Well,
Huh.
a normal person would say, "Hey, Tara, I need you to come in here and talk and explain to me why are you giving me different information than that knucklehead Larry Johnson?"
Mhm.
And you would explain why.
Right.
Basically, because Larry doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Larry's not up to speed on this. Well, that's
Mhm.
what happened. That didn't happen. I got informed that they had these problems when they said, "We're not going to promote you." And I said, "Okay, great."
Wow.
I saw that the former envoy for the Central American Peace Process, Ambassador Morris Busby, had just been named as the coordinator for counterterrorism at state, and he liked my work, and so he asked me to come work for him, and I did. So that's where I
Okay.
got the background in intelligence, both operations, analytical. I worked also on the policy side of the State
Mhm.
Department on terrorism issues, transportation security issues. And then I did 23 years doing scripting military exercises for the U.S. Special Operations Forces. So I'm a unique kind of person. I'm not
Mhm.
trying to say I'm really special, but my experience with intelligence, with
Mhm.
policy, with investigations, criminal investigations, and with
Mhm.
military put me in a unique position to sort of see how the entire operation works, how it all comes together. Because
Yeah.
normally people are only looking through a straw at their own narrow section. I saw how the whole thing integrates.
Yeah, I mean, I worked, as you know, on the legislative side. So I worked for Leon Panetta and then Joe Biden, and I worked for a state senator, and I worked on congressional races, mostly for Democrats. Now I will never vote Democrat again, as you know.
Right.
Yeah. And then I did Homeland Security, and I was trained by Seattle Police. Then Homeland Security, I was the trainer for domestic violence and stalking victims. But their training, so I would train military police on those issues. And then I went on, as you know, I came forward about Joe Biden finally. I had filed a report in 1993. It's sealed. Joe Biden sealed it, and we're trying to get it opened. But Matt Gaetz has been trying. And I think Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit as well. But I then got surveilled from 2019. I think they did a FISA hearing on me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but is what was assumed. And I've decided to fight back. So I'm in Russia, as you know, Moscow, Russia. I'm under political asylum, and I've decided to fight back. And I have 2 lawsuits right now. I have a complaint to the Attorney General, a complaint to the UN, but I also have a lawsuit against the FBI and DOJ directly for violation of my First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I understand
yeah,
completely
I'm
because
very angry about it because, and I just am refusing to be intimidated by them. I
yeah,
just, and they did some pretty heavy surveillance, enough to where I was here on vacation and didn't feel comfortable going back. And then John Kirby gave a press conference from the NSA about me and said, "Oh, it's perfectly safe for her to come home." So
yeah. No, it's a sad state of affairs
it is.
that I've lived long enough to see. We used to make fun of the Soviet Union as a corrupt place that was
Mhm.
there were no freedom of expression, that
Mhm.
the people were oppressed, and now we've had a complete role reversal where
It is,
that's
I'm living here and I'm telling you, Larry, I have never felt more free. I work, my work is with RT. It has been for a few years, like writing op-eds and doing whatever. And as a contributor, and I am never told what to say because as a
oh
contributor, I literally just give my opinion like you do. I'm a
yeah.
considered a political science expert, international relations expert. Isn't that interesting but in the US, we're completely muzzled. I mean, have you gotten pressure because of the way you've been speaking out or no?
Well, I'm not invited on any of the U.S. Mainstream media shows.
Ah,
I used to be, I was ubiquitous on CBS,
mhm.
ABC, NBC. I was the NBC terrorism analyst.
I remember
I,
seeing that. Yeah.
I was a Fox News
What
contributor for a
happened?
year. Well, the Fox fired me because I said that going in November of 2002, that if the United States decided to invade Iraq, it would be a mistake because the United States was not in a position to fight a two-front war.
Uh-huh.
And Roger Ailes sent word down. He said, I don't want him on TV anymore. They paid out the contract, but they wouldn't allow me on air. And then when I became a critic of Barack Obama in 2007, when in 2008, the media rallied behind Obama and they wouldn't have me on air.
Oh, that
And
was
it
the
was,
nail in the coffin. Yeah.
but what was fascinating is, 2 weeks ago,
Hmm.
I was approached by the Russian delegation at the United Nations.
Yes.
Ambassador Polyansky
Hmm.
invited me to address the United Nations Security Council on the issue of Nord Stream. And so I accepted. And at no point did they say, hey, now here's what we'd like you to say. Never had that conversation.
No.
They said, hey, we'd like, we know you have some views on this. We'd like you to share your views. I said, okay, we'll do. Wrote it out, made sure it was about a 12-minute speech, sent it to them on Tuesday. So I was
Hmm.
going to appear on Friday. So they got it on Tuesday.
Hmm.
And in order for the translators to get it translated.
Right.
At no point did they come back to me and say, hey, yeah, we don't like this mention of the Russian money laundering case with Bank of New York because we think that's didn't say that. They made no suggestion, objection, anything. They let me be me, and
Yeah, I
uh,
mean, and yeah,
it,
I've had Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky on the show, as you know, and I have to say, Larry, they're not interested in covering up anything. They're interested in the truth,
yeah,
um, and
yeah,
they've been very open about wanting peaceful talks and wanting peace talks. And then it was, of course, as we all know, Boris Johnson put a from the UK, stopped that in its tracks. But coming back to
yeah.
you and your life, like with the UN Security Council, when you spoke, what was the reaction of the UK delegation and the US delegation of you speaking on, as a guest of the Russian delegation? How did they respond to you?
Uh, the biggest prick were the French ambassador. What a what a
Surprise, surprise.
what
Macron.
what
Macron.
what
Yeah.
a disgrace this guy
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Um, sort of the protocol, the diplomatic protocol, and I was preceded by two other briefers. One is an assistant
Hmm.
director of the UN, and the other she was the head of the counterterrorism office at the UN. They each made a briefing, and then I did my part. So the normal protocol is you either thank the briefers or at
Hmm.
least acknowledge their presence. We take note of what the briefers said. Um, what was interesting is I received direct thanks from, I would say, a majority of the members of the Security Council. But
Hmm.
the French ambassador, he didn't say a word about any of the briefers. He just plunged into his attack on Russia.
Oh.
The American representative, he's some lower level bag carrier that I didn't get the pleasure of Linda Thomas Greenfield coming. He acknowledged the 2 UN briefers, pretended that I didn't exist, which is fine.
Right.
I wasn't going there for recognition or people to pat me on the back. The British, I sat right next to the British representative. So during my presentation, they put this young lady up into the chair. She's in her 30s. I'm old. If you're 30, you're a young lady. And then she paid attention. She wasn't fiddling with her phone or falling asleep. So when the actual British rep showed up for comments, he did say, "I thank the briefers." He was the only. So I give the Brits credit. They had some class about it.
I don't know. They, you know what they did to me? I was supposed to speak to the UN Security Council in back last year, and it was the British delegation and the US that literally pulled the plug an hour before I was to speak.
Really?
They pulled the transmission. They said, we will not allow her to speak. Luckily, we had prepared another briefer, Dan Kovalik, whom I'm sure you know his work. Yeah. And I had suggested he be a backup for me in case, because I had a feeling and I was right about my intuition. It got back to Biden or whoever, but it was the British who led the thing to shut me down. I was not going to be allowed. And so they didn't. And then they did a hit piece on me in Semaphore about it.
It was, I didn't receive that kind of pushback. I had, the Chinese were very receptive. The ambassador from Algeria, particularly,
Chinese is receptive.
Mozambique, Sierra Leone, of course. And then I had a great chat with Ambassador Navenzia afterwards.
Good.
He was really a fun, pleasant guy.
Yeah.
And the kind of guy you like to go out to dinner with, have a beer.
Yeah. Well, in your work now, did you ever you were an analyst, so you never did undercover work yourself, did you?
Well, while at the agency, no, but in my second life as
counterterrorism.
When we formed BERG Associates in 1998.
Okay.
Initially I had 5 partners, and then that got whittled down to just 3 of us. One was the former chief of international ops at DEA, and then John Moynihan, who ran DEA's undercover money laundering operations in New York City, storefront operations for 4 years, but just a masterful financial guy and an accountant. So we did, we were hired by a law firm. We came up with the idea of pursuing a civil racketeering case against Philip Morris, British American Tobacco, Japan Tobacco, R.J. Reynolds for money laundering, because Moynihan knew through his prior work at DEA that he was raking in all this money from these tobacco companies. So they were actively involved in working with drug trafficking organizations, Dominican, Mexican, and Colombian cartels, and were laundering money for them. And so we launched that as a case. We got hired to do it. And so in the course of collecting evidence, I was doing some undercover work. I had to go in with an undercover camera into the San Andresitos. So in Bogota, in Colombia.
Oh, that's dangerous.
Yeah, they've got these, we'll call them black market areas that they sell everything you can imagine. All the product comes out of Panama. And then it's shipped on these boats that are called costales, coastal boats. It's offloaded at a port up in the northeast corner of Colombia called Maicao, which is filled, ironically, it's filled with a lot of Lebanese Muslims. So they got a big sort of Hezbollah presence there. And then the goods are shipped into the San Andresitos. So for example, Oakley, let me show you. Like, here's a pair of Oakley sunglasses.
I remember those. Yes. The Oakleys.
So they would be selling sunglasses that look like these. They were called Oatleys. Oatleys.
They were very popular back in the day, especially with surfers. Yeah.
Yeah. So they sold Oatleys, and they sold Disney products, except they weren't called Walt Disney. It was called Sydney.
Sydney.
But they used the same letter. They switched the D
Yeah.
and the S. But cigarettes, tobacco, televisions, and a lot of that money was actually controlled by one of the FARC, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. So, I've done undercover work, and where we've had to do a variety of investigations and gather evidence.
You know what I find interesting, speaking of undercover work, is RFK's campaign, which I think is just an ops. That's my opinion. It might not be yours, but his campaign manager is his daughter-in-law, and she was also CIA. And I don't know if you read her memoir, but she's totally part of the military-industrial complex and has not changed. And I don't really see a change in her. So I just think it's interesting how much, and you've watched, I'm sure, the reporting from Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, how much the intelligence services has infiltrated social media and media. Was it this infiltrated when you were working for the CIA, or is this a new phenomenon, or has it been like this all along?
Well, so I did work directly on what's called a covert action program on Afghanistan, when the Soviets were in Afghanistan. And this covert action program was designed to produce propaganda or anti-Soviet propaganda. So for example, my one contribution was we had these T-shirts, these shirts made up that were going to be passed out on the beaches of Uruguay. And it showed all of these these Afghan refugees. And it said in Spanish on it, these poor children can't go home for Christmas. Now, ignore the fact that they're Muslims and they didn't celebrate Christmas.
Right.
Okay. That's one little problem, but it was a great imagery, got out there. So there were things like that. There were newspaper articles that were written and planted, magazine articles written and planted.
Okay.
There was one Frenchman who was renowned as he hated the CIA. He was convinced, I think it was Jean-Jacques Schreiber, was it? And he was convinced that the CIA was behind everything. We were planting articles in his magazine and he didn't realize it.
Oh, you're serious. Oh, that's interesting.
And then
my goodness. So he was like what you would call controlled opposition.
Yeah, he didn't realize it. He was just, his publication was being used as a mouthpiece to put out a CIA approved message. So we didn't have social media back there.
Right.
We were in the early days of getting computers, and there was no connection to the internet. The whole concept of the internet was not even relevant within the CIA at that point. But the agency was definitely going to take the tools of communication and try to have an influence over it and manipulate it. So it doesn't surprise me that you're going to see efforts to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, Signal, just run down the list.
Well, and they're trying to get a hold of TikTok by the moves they're making to try to get it sold.
Yeah, well, they're going, that's not fair. We're the only ones that can control social media.
Exactly.
Like, oh, God, please. The hypocrisy just stinks.
Yeah, it does. And that brings me to this question, about current events. Because I know, you kind of laid out and outlined what soured you to the CIA's tactics then, but we're in a whole different world now. And you have Biden's people, whom I know. I mean, these are people I know with their mics off, right? Like I know who these people are behind the scenes. Ted Kaufman, you don't see them in the news, right? They're behind the scenes. They're working it behind it.
Right.
And then the people in front of the camera, like Tony Blinken and his whole thing, but they're all from Obama's camp. They all kind of just that whole administration just moved over to Biden. Right. So the people in the background, right, in the suits, if you will. So you're watching, I'm sure, observing this amp up that we're having, and you just heard Vladimir Putin was just inaugurated, and you made a prediction, and we'll get to that too. But I wanted to ask you, he was talking about doing nuclear testing, right? On
An exercise for tactical nuclear missiles.
right,
Yeah.
exercise in tactical nuclear warfare. And, that's not rhetoric when it comes from Russia. They don't do rhetoric. There's red lines, and then when those red lines get crossed, they respond, especially if they feel there's an existential threat.
Right.
I feel like there's not a lot of control. I feel, this is my perception. You tell me yours. My perception is there's different camps going on, pulling for power behind the scenes because there's not strong leadership right now in the U.S.
In the U.S. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's no clear direction. Let's start with Russia's response, because
Okay.
the announcement about to say, okay, we're going to do exercises on tactical nuclear weapons. So, I spent 23 years scripting military exercises. And so it's important to understand what was being said the other day.
Okay.
This announcement coincided with the day before, 2 days before, you'd had statements first by David Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, talking about, hey, yeah, so we're going to encourage the Ukrainians basically use our weapons to strike inside Russia. And then you had the French reports out claiming that there were French foreign legionnaires on the front lines in Ukraine. So the Russian government did a number of things, bang, bang, bang. They called in the French and the Brits and basically said, okay, if you do this, then you're making yourself a target. We will retaliate and we'll hit your bases. We're not going to confine ourselves to just Ukraine. We'll come after your bases outside of Ukraine. Got the message?
Yeah.
And the French guy, I hope he had a change of underwear, because he probably he probably needed it. I think he may have soiled himself in the process.
Probably.
Because within 30 minutes of that meeting and that rebuke, the French Foreign Ministry in Paris put out an announcement. Oh, mon Dieu, no, we have no French legionnaires. They are not there. No, so
right.
They pulled back. They walked that back real quick. Cameron's folks got on the horn and said to the Associated Press, he never said that. And even if you got a photograph of or a video of him saying that, he didn't really mean to say it. So please take it down. We didn't mean it. So they're backing away there. But at the same time, Russia, to underscore seriousness, says, okay, we're going to be doing these exercises. Now, unless they've already pre-programmed that, because these exercises require at least 12 months of planning, sometimes 18 to 24 months of planning. You get an initial planning conference where you sit down and say, okay, what forces are going to be involved? What's the scenario? We're going to create a scenario. And then the nature of these exercises is to test, to go from an alert that, oh my God, we've got a problem, to the warning order, to the deployment order, to the communications back and forth of who's going to do what, to the actual carrying out of the attack, the simulated attack. So you put together, it's like a movie script, sort of. You write the script out and people go through that. So I think Russia was just announcing, yeah, we're going to do that. And we're doing it to be ready if you guys cross any of these red lines that we have now laid out for you so clearly, that if we have to do it for real, we'll do it for real. And, again, I think the collective West had sort of a gulp at that point. Because there's some that still believe Russia's bluffing, but there's enough who awaken to the fact, no, they're serious as a heart attack. They're not bluffing. They're not making this up.
Well, so, you and I are having this conversation right before Victory Day. This show will air this Friday, the day after Victory Day. But you had made a prediction there may be some activity. What is your thought and analysis based on what you're seeing? The inauguration went very smoothly. It was very quiet here.
Yeah.
It's very cold. It snowed today. So much for spring, but
yeah, good Lord.
But so what are your thoughts on that? Like what?
So I've got a friend here. He's lived in Moscow for over 24 years. His wife is still there, but he's brought his daughter here to the States because his mother's ill and he's taking care of her. So we were together on Sunday talking.
Mhm.
And he goes, and we talk about my trip. And I said, I didn't see any police. He goes, yeah, that's not the case right now. He says, my wife has said she's made two times been stopped within the last week. The police are stopping a lot of people, and he said they're looking for something. So that tells me that the SVR and FSB combined, they've got some information, some intelligence that indicates the Ukrainians, they're going to try something. And they don't have the exact timing of it, but they're trying to be proactive in sorting it out. That's number one. Number two, the U.S. Embassy in Berlin put out last Thursday a warning that was eerily similar to the one U.S. Embassy Moscow issued in March about the possibility of an attack in 48 hours. Now, the difference with the Berlin announcement is it didn't specify 48 hours. It was somewhat vague, but still warning of a possible terrorist attack.
Isn't their obligation, if they have more information about details, that they must share that with the Russian government?
Well, there's no legal obligation.
No, but I thought that there was agreements about that, just diplomatic agreements.
If you've got a serious terrorist threat, you would genuinely share it with the host, with another government, even if you weren't friendly with that government. Because if you didn't, then you'd be complicit in that attack.
Right.
So, but the fact that the State Department made the call for the U.S. Embassy Berlin to issue that announcement, that's what people need to understand. That wasn't Embassy Berlin making up their own decision. This came out of originates out of the Counterterrorism Bureau normally, but it could have been State Intelligence and Research, INR, could have been Consular Affairs, one of those, but there was intelligence that indicates something's afoot. Now, the other thought that came to my mind is perhaps the West is preparing a false flag operation where there will be a terrorist attack in Germany that'll be blamed on Russia and use that attack as a justification to do an Article 5 and try to put NATO troops into the Ukraine. I hope they're not that stupid because if they go that route, yes, this war is going to dramatically escalate and there's going to be a lot of Europeans and Americans die. And that's just the cold hard fact. So,
because I don't think it would be limited to just the territory of Europe.
Oh, no. Yeah. And sad to say, but I think America is going to have a couple of its military bases destroyed before it'll wake up and say, okay, we got to stop this madness. The United States is in no position to fight any kind of conflict with Russia or with China. Hell, we can't even defeat the Houthis. Okay?
I know.
We got a bunch of guys running around in sandals in the desert, firing missiles that have shut down the Red Sea, and the United States with a carrier task force can't shut it down. Think about that. If we can't shut down the Houthis, we're going to take on the Russians. Give me a break.
Well, and to that note, you've got a lot of rhetoric coming out of DC from on both sides of the aisle about Ukraine, and that they're convinced that Vladimir Putin is going to march through Europe. And the only lone voice, I think there's maybe 12 other representatives in Congress that go along with her, is Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz. But they're basically saying Vladimir Putin is not interested in that. And I can tell you from living here in Russia and listening and watching how everything's going, they are not interested in war with Europe or the United States. They're interested in moving forward with economic innovation and partnerships and trade and prosperity and building, not destroying. And I just don't understand, except that being American, I know that there's a huge industry with, weapons manufacturing. And that's part of the problem. And, like I mentioned, Leon Panetta, well, he sits on the board of Raytheon. And so he's out there with all his anti-Russia, all his rhetoric, because he sits on the board of Raytheon and they made $1 trillion over the last 3 years. So, of course.
Yeah, we don't have the full picture
Yeah.
of why the United States has made Ukraine such a priority. We've got hints. So the fact that there were so many different biological labs set up in
Yeah.
Ukraine, and the so I haven't had time to dig in to say, okay, show me all the U.S. companies that were invested in that, and show me how much money the U.S. government was putting into that. Show me what Ukrainians were involved, because I guarantee you to have. I understand you got one, but there were dozens, if not more than 20, that are. So you got to say, I have never seen that, never in any other. And again, I've held top secret clearances. I've had access to what they call special access programs. Never seen that. It's like, what the hell were we doing? So you've
Money
got that.
laundering. That's what it
Well,
is. I mean,
well,
it's money laundering.
understand that money laundering, when we're talking money laundering, means you've got income that's been generated from a criminal activity, and you're trying to move that money through channels that will make it appear like, oh, yeah, we got this $10 million from selling all these cigarettes. Well, it
Well,
wasn't really.
yeah, Larry, but isn't that what it is when you're sending money over, but then it comes right back to some of the politicians? You know what I mean?
No. Well,
Lorraine.
that's different. That's graft.
Yeah.
So um,
And selling
graft,
weapons on the black market, which are now
graft,
ending up all over.
yeah. So graft and fraud are different from money laundering. So money laundering really is it's an activity, but you always have to have what they call a predicate crime. So a predicate crime could be, let's say you're making money from selling from sex trafficking or selling organs of people. Okay,
Yes.
yeah, you'd want to find a way to launder that money to make it came from a legitimate economic activity. And again, that's another thing that is rumors and reports that you've put out about the sex trafficking
And
and the
organ.
organ harvesting that's taking place. That's big money as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
and what you just mentioned when you were talking, besides the weapons going on the black market, it's just interesting. Like for instance, Biden right now, the way some of the money has entered into his pockets, or jobs, and I know that's different. It's not directly money laundering, but that's how people understand it. When
yeah,
money
yeah,
is supposed to go one way, but it comes another way, and I think what people generally American citizens are looking at is the fact that their tax money is all going over to this proxy war, right? We're fighting against Russia via Ukraine. But really, what's underneath it is a lot of politicians like Nancy Pelosi, John Kerry, Chuck Schumer, Lindsey Graham, they're personally getting enriched and becoming multimillionaires. How?
yeah,
Leon Panetta as well. How?
yeah.
How they were public servants. Their salaries are low. Why are they multimillionaires?
Yeah, well, they figured a way how to work the system, and
Yeah.
the U.S. system is based upon graft and corruption fundamentally.
Grafton. All
One
right.
of the other one of the other dimensions here that touches on both Hunter Biden, and people focus a lot on Burisma, but the
Yeah.
other revelations that came out about that is nobody, they talk about Burisma and Hunter Biden. Rarely do they talk about Cofer Black. So here's Cofer Black, who was the chief of station for the CIA in Sudan when Carlos the Jackal was picked up.
Right.
He was in charge of the counterterrorism center on the days preceding 9/11 and immediately after. He then, after he completed a CIA career, moved to State Department, to my old office, was the ambassador at large for counterterrorism. And then, like 2016, first he gets appointed to the board of a bank up in Latvia. I think it's the Baltic Bank. And he touted it as the reason because he'd been involved with terrorism finance in his previous career. So he knew how to, spot terrorist finance, et cetera. He didn't know a damn thing about it. Very, my judgment. And then the next year gets appointed to Burisma's board. Well, guess what? Burisma has financial interactions with that bank. And there are allegations that the terrorist financing for terrorists went through Burisma through that bank. So is that just a coincidence that Cofer Black was assigned, got those two jobs?
Right.
I don't believe in coincidence. I believe it was, this was planned, and that there was some other CIA activity involved. Also, the report out of the New York Times that there are 12 CIA bases in Ukraine. The only countries which may have had more bases were Vietnam. I don't think the CIA during the entire war in Afghanistan had 12 bases. They had 4 or 5. I know they had one in Kandahar. You've got a station, and then the bases are branches off of that. And each base would normally have at least a couple of CIA officers, an admin person, and a communicator, at least 4. But you end up talking about a lot of people. Again, what were these bases? What was their mission? That's not all just carrying out training for paramilitary or training for Ukrainian military forces or training for Ukrainian intelligence officers. So that's why I say there's many layers of this onion that need to be peeled back to figure out why the United States is literally basing hundreds of billions of dollars into Ukraine, and that this didn't just start in 2022. This predated that. There's a history there, and some of the history actually goes back to 1949.
1940. I was going to say 1948, but 49. You're right. Yeah. Could you touch on that a bit? And what I wanted to ask you was, on that note, we know it was 2014. There was the Meudon coup. That was Western backed, Victoria Nuland, all of that. But that is an interesting question. So why the focus? Is it because of in your opinion, a geographical location? Is it because, like, for instance, BlackRock is buying up a lot of Ukraine? I think 24% at this point. Is it because that land is of value? Is it just geographical location strategically? I mean, what is your opinion on that? Is that part of it?
No, I think it's a combination of factors. I mean, one, after Russia, Ukraine was at least within the top 3 or 4 of countries in the world with natural resources that were very valuable. So there was that appeal. But
thus BlackRock.
Right. But also historically, they've looked at Ukraine as a springboard to take out Russia. So, right after the end of World War II, U.S. intelligence officers aligned themselves with the Banderistas, the Bandera group, that had fought fought the Soviets, and they were still, they had aligned themselves briefly with the Germans too,
and Nazis, the
Nazis, absolutely Nazis, and were responsible for carrying out massacres in Poland. The Volyn massacre is the most notorious.
Right.
So there was this from the very early days. They tried to foment. The CIA was instrumental in trying to foment an insurgency that was defeated by the Soviets in 1954-55. But that didn't mean that those ties and connections with Ukraine ended. And so they continued to try to make inroads. I mean, after I left CIA, I was hired to accompany a female CIA contractor to Kiev in September of 94. And her job was to set up business centers. That was the cover. But what they were really trying to do was to identify people who were connected with either the GRU or former KGB, and identify people that could possibly be recruited. It was an operation designed to do that. And we had a couple of Ukrainian folks collaborating with us. One was actually of Armenian descent, and the other fellow was a former Spetsnaz guy. So, my point in raising this is just the CIA has been involved with trying to get information and intelligence through Ukraine, but they ultimately, since 2014, the plan was use Ukraine as a battering ram. We're going to hit Russia militarily. We're going to hit Russia economically. And that combination of military economic force is going to so shaken shake the Russians, weaken them to the point that they will oust Vladimir Putin, that there will be chaos in the government, and the West can basically divide and conquer. That was the plan. And part of the incentive in that was to get control of Russia's oil, natural gas, uranium, aluminum, gold, nickel. You could run down the list. It is Russia's viewed as this great treasure house, and the West wants to take it. That's one of the motives, and that gets back to BlackRock, making this incredibly stupid bet. They're going to buy up 24% of Ukraine that's now under control of Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it still doesn't, you got all these data points. Why is the Clinton Foundation the number one source of, what is number one source of money are from Ukrainian oligarchs? What makes Ukrainian oligarchs feel that that the Clinton Foundation is so special that of all the 153, 54 countries in the world, those guys are going to give more money to the Clintons than anybody else? What are they buying? What are they buying?
Exactly. What are they buying? This leads me to this question, because it has to do with the Clintons. The Obamas and the Clintons kind of work together in tandem.
Yeah.
They're talking, I've heard rumors politically that at the Democratic National Convention, Biden is going to step down voluntarily.
Right.
And it's going to be Michelle Obama.
Yeah,
now, that is possible. People were saying that's not possible. And at the Democratic National Convention, it is. Not only that, but they can get rid of Kamala Harris at the same time, because she can nominate whoever she wants for VP if she was. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Is that just a weird rumor, or?
Oh, no, that rumor has been around for at least 6 months.
Okay.
I call it the it's the Democrat fan. It's like the equivalent of the teenage boy fantasy that
Farrah Fawcett poster.
Yeah, right. They put up the poster, and then Farrah Fawcett's going to jump out and jump into bed with him.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, it's terrific fantasy, but it's ain't going to happen.
Right.
Or let's assume that it does happen. You're going to see the same magical event that's happening with RFK's campaign. I mean, RFK's campaign, it's turned into a festering turd of a political circus.
Yeah.
It is, it's chaotic. And he's taking positions, his positions vis-a-vis Israel are so extreme.
Yeah.
God, he's making Biden look like a moderate.
And, I know.
And so he's right there alienated a substantial sector of the Democrat electorate.
Yes.
Republicans aren't going to support him, even though they say, oh yeah, he'll hurt Trump more than he'll hurt Biden. Nonsense. That's fantasy land. Michelle Obama has never demonstrated herself to be a good politician at all. Hell,
she doesn't need to be.
She couldn't attract viewers. They had a Netflix, program. She couldn't attract viewers. Nobody would watch her.
So you think that if she were up against Trump, it would be a no-brainer. It wouldn't be successful anyway.
No.
Okay.
It's just.
Okay. I honestly, Larry, I usually can predict and kind of sort out these things, but right now I feel like there's so many things at play, particularly Trump. With the prosecutions they're trying against him. Even today, there was more salacious stuff, of them trying to put him in jail so hard. I just don't know, like, are they using him at some point? They're just going to allow him to take office, and then they have a bad guy to just, I don't know. But
well, they're gonna try to stop him. I mean, but their whole lawfare thing is coming apart at the seams.
Yeah, one of the cases got dropped today, right? The classified documents case has been postponed indefinitely.
Indefinitely postponed because the prosecutor admitted to tampering with evidence. So what they did, I don't know what if you heard this, but basically the Department of Justice conspired with the National Records to have a box of classified documents sent to Trump. Trump didn't request them. It was sent without his knowledge, And
Oh,
then they drafted up the search warrant to go find the documents that they sent.
right.
They created a crime. They planted evidence.
Of
And
course.
so
Well,
that proof of that came forward, and the prosecutor, yeah, we did that. And the judge is going, wait
yeah,
a goddamn minute. This
yeah.
Hall.
Can't do that.
This
Yeah.
this is indefinitely postponed. That's number one.
Yeah.
The Stormy Daniels trial, so he gets convicted. They say, oh, when he was single, he was hanging out with a hooker. Oh
Yeah.
my God, he's the only one in Washington, D.C. that's done that.
Well, and okay, so let's move forward a little bit. I mean, I know before I get to that though, there's so many things I want to ask you because you're such an amazing, you understand the geopolitical landscape so well, the big picture as well as the details. But you've got the U.S. right now on three war fronts, basically.
Yeah.
They're almost taking us to World War III. So we won't, I don't know if we'll make it to Taiwan, but let's look at Gaza right now. And as we speak, the US just pulled back some bombs that were supposed to go to Israel and aid because of what they were doing on Rafah. And I mean, this is the thing with social media. We're seeing in real time the bombing of civilians just indiscriminately. Iraq was as brutal in another way. There was 1 million people that died. But in your experience with your background, have you seen anything like this?
Oh no, this is unprecedented. Let's put it into context. So the Israelis have been at war with the Palestinians for 76 years. 76 years.
Yeah.
During that entire 76-year period, I think the worst violence against Palestinians in terms of death, number killed, were the massacres in southern Lebanon at the Sabra Shatila camps. What was that, 1982, 83? That was only like 3,000 people. So since October 7th, Israel has engaged in the murder of close to 45,000 Palestinians, 15,000 children.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an unprecedented scale of violence, and it's all been predicated on a lie.
Yeah.
Because the Hamas, number one, is touted as this international terrorist organization. It is not. I finally kept hearing this. I said, okay, how many terrorist attacks have they carried out? So the Israeli foreign ministry puts out the statistics, and those statistics cover from 2000 to, I'll give you the specific date here, to April. Let me get up here. I think it's April 26, 2024. A grand total of 692 terrorist attacks, so-called terrorist attacks, in that 24-year period. And so when you start going through it, the vast majority of these are ambushes, fire, where people are shooting guns at each other. A significant number are attacks on Israeli military, Israeli police. So Hamas is a national liberation organization. Hamas really is no different, in my view, than my ancestors who were fighting against the Brits during the American Revolution in 1776. The difference is Hamas claims a religious motivation out of Islam, but they are not the religious fanatics that we've seen with respect to ISIS or Al Qaeda. Quite different. Al Qaeda, ISIS are genuine international terrorist organizations, ideologically driven. This is a Palestinian movement, and I got to point out, of those 692 attacks, I haven't yet been able to figure out how many of those were attributed to Hamas. Most of them are just, linked as an event without any assigning of blame to a particular group. But some of them were carried out by Hezbollah. Some of them were carried out by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But the point in this is that what the operation that Hamas launched on October 7th was not a terrorist attack. It was a military operation. It was very specifically focused to attack and destroy U.S. Israeli military bases, which it did. It succeeded in that. And to capture as many hostages as possible and get those returned to Gaza to hold them as bargaining chips. It was the Israeli response when they finally woke up out of their slumber and launched the attack helicopters at the cars that were fleeing the rave in the desert, that they killed a majority, of the people that were killed that day, I believe, were killed by the Israelis, not by Hamas. And we've got extensive eyewitness testimony from other Israelis that were in the kibbutzim that report that the Israeli tanks pulled up and blew up houses where Hamas was holding some Israeli hostages, and they blew up houses, killing both the Hamas fighters and the hostages. Then they pushed the lie that, they beheaded all these babies, 40 babies. Give me the name of one. Give me the name of just one. Give me one grandparent that's mourning the loss of a child.
That was a journalist pushed that narrative that was untrue and had to back down and admit that she had no facts.
No, it's a complete lie. Same for baking babies in ovens. Okay, what's the name of the baby? What's the name of the baby? Give us the name. Show us. And if you got the body that was baked in an oven, then we'll have to know. We'll have to know where it was buried. But they can't do that because it's all a lie. It's all propaganda. So what's taking place right now is a direct. I posted a video the other day of these Israeli soldiers, police. They're all kitted out in ninja gear, and they're just walking. They're just randomly beating Palestinians that are walking along the street. Well, I've seen video images like that before. Only it was Nazis beating unarmed Jews in Poland and in Ukraine back in 1942-41. So the Israelis now are behaving exactly like the Schutzstaffel, the SS did during the early days of where they started to exterminate the Jews in Europe.
So do you think this is more of a Zionist influence?
Oh, absolutely. Because it's not fair to call this a Jewish movement.
This is Zionist.
It's Zionist, a pure Zionist.
And they've been pretty active since 1948. That's when they took hold.
They've taken over. So when you consider that, Jeffrey Sachs, Jewish, Matt Blumenthal, Jewish, Aaron Mate, Jewish, Norman Finkelstein, Jewish. So you've got a lot of Jewish people speaking out
against
protests, against
what's
Israelis
happening.
Doing. And
Katie Halper as well. She's been speaking out quite loudly against, for years actually before what just recently happened. But she has often had shows, and so did Aaron Mate, talking about the struggle of the Palestinians, and so did Max Blumenthal. To his credit, and Gabor Mate has spoken out as well, the trauma specialist and Holocaust survivor himself. So you have Jewish people against this, and then you have Zionists, and you have Netanyahu, who now it looks like the U.S. is ready to throw under the bus, kind of like Zelensky.
So I forgot to comment on because you initially started the question about the U.S. has suspended the bombs.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, maybe they suspended the shipments because of what Israel said. We're going to attack Rafah. We don't care what you say. Another possibility is the U.S. didn't have any more weapons to send. We've run out.
Maybe.
Like old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to get her poor dog a bone, and when she got there, the cupboard was bare cupboard. Because we can't give the Ukrainians the 155 millimeter shells, don't have them, and we can't give them Patriot batteries, Patriot missiles, don't have them. So it could be that we ran out, but then the Biden administration thought, hey, let's be clever. Let's say that we're withholding, so to send them a strong message, when in fact we couldn't send it to them even if we wanted. So that's a possibility.
So then, what's the insanity about Taiwan? Like, how can we, if you're in the Pentagon and you're having warfare, then what?
Okay. So There was a great article that was written by Alexander Vershinin
Yes.
and the Royal Urban Services Institute. So basically, the United States has run military exercises where they're going to war with China. Each of these exercises are limited to 1 month. Wow, we win in 1 month.
Okay.
Well, the United States is not equipped or trained to fight a war of attrition. It doesn't have the production, the industrial capacity to sustain a war of attrition, to supply it. And even if it decided to attack China or defend Taiwan, the only way you're going to do that is you're going to sell a carrier task force or multiple carrier task force forward to Taiwan. Well, Iran already showed what the Chinese plan is going to be. You know what that plan is? China will have 120,000 drones. They'll launch those drones. It'll be a 2-hour flight out to the carrier task force. Then they'll launch cruise missiles so that the cruise missiles that are traveling faster will arrive about the same time as those drones. So right off the bat, you completely overwhelm the air defense systems on those naval ships. They cannot stop all of those drones, all of those cruise missiles, and then the Chinese follow up with their hypersonic missiles that are delivered with aircraft that will sink every one of those carriers, every one of the destroyers, every one of the accompanying ships.
Wow.
The U.S. Navy will be wiped out in a period of 2 to 3 hours. And then what?
Yeah.
That's, if I'm the Chinese, that's plan A right there, because we can do that and we don't even have to put any of our ships out. You can have some backup plans about what submarines would do, what your ships would do. But right off the bat, the Chinese have the enormous industrial capability to produce those kinds of drones that can effectively overwhelm. And that's what the Iranians were showing when they attacked the Israelis.
Right.
They weren't trying to carry out a strategic defeat. They're putting the Israelis on notice. Okay, we're no longer the little kid that you get to walk down the street and beat up because you're the bully. We've grown up. We've now got drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, and we can match you blow for blow. And frankly, I think Israel was shocked. They couldn't believe what Iran did. And despite the claims that it was a failure, a great success for the West, that's just bullshit. At least 9 of the Iranian ballistic missiles hit their targets. Again, they weren't trying to kill or destroy. They were sending a message that they don't want this to escalate out of control. But if it does, again, it was also directed at the United States. What is the United States going to do to Iran? We don't have air power, flying bombing missions into Iran. You're going to get the U.S. aircraft shot down. And they don't make a difference anyway. We already saw that in the first Gulf War. We did all that aerial bombing. Right. That didn't stop the fighting on the ground. That didn't halt the insurgency. That didn't stop terrorist attacks. So it's like, at some point, have the self-awareness to look at what you've been doing and realize it doesn't work. And if, we're going to send our air carrier task force to the Persian Gulf, yeah, that'll scare the Iranians. They'll shut down Straits of Hormuz in a heartbeat. If we can't open the Red Sea from the Houthis, how in the name of God are we going to take on the Iranians, who are far more powerful, far more capable, and have the added advantage of having carried out joint military exercises with Russia and China for at least the last 4 years?
It's interesting, and I want to come back to Ukraine for just a moment. You've talked eloquently about the genocide that's being carried out by Israel, in the Gaza Strip. I originally had thought it had something to do also with the gas and oil reserves off the coast of the Gaza Strip.
I'm sure that's another one of the hidden motives. Yeah, absolutely.
Money incentive. But going back to Ukraine, you're seeing now Telegram postings by Ukrainian soldiers saying they don't have weapons, they don't have their whole regiments are being killed. Like it's over, and the military operation that Russia's been doing has been successful. They're through Donbass. They can now go all the way straight to Kiev at this point. How do you see that wrapping up? In other words, I'm going to ask you a tough question in the sense that it's a very sober one. Do you feel like we're already in World War III? That's obvious because we have all these global conflicts happening. But do you see this escalating into a nuclear war with Russia, or do you feel like something will back it down?
Yeah, no, I think the West is ultimately going to back down.
Okay.
They're going to come to their senses. They realize they can't. They're going to talk tough. They're going to make threats.
Are there any adults in the room? Because it sure ain't Tony Blinken. I'm telling you.
No. They're on the U.S. side. No adults in the room anywhere. None.
Not even in the intelligence apparatus, the military apparatus.
There are a few in the chain of command on the military side, but their voices aren't always listened to. Yeah. Maybe Bill Burns has finally, pulled his head out of his ass and decided to, to admit what he admitted to in 2008 when he wrote the cable saying, "Hey, this NATO thing with Ukraine is a red line for the Russians. Niet means niet, so don't do it." That was the position back then. Now he's been donning the cheerleader outfit and pretending, "Oh yeah, things are going great for Ukraine." Ukraine is like an advanced game of Jenga. That you got all those.
I'm familiar.
Putting them out.
Yeah.
You're way down, man. One more you pull out, the thing's going to collapse. Right. I think we're at that point.
Okay.
Because Ukraine has run out of time. Yeah, we're getting 61. They've approved $61 million from the U.S. Great. Doesn't buy soldiers. Doesn't even buy enough mercenaries to come fight that are trained to know what to do. So they don't have time to recruit. Even if they had time to recruit, they don't have time to train. Training, if you're going to take a new troop and then train them to operate a tank at a company level is like 150 guys, say 5 tanks. If you're going to train them to operate 5 tanks as a unit, that takes a year and 3 months to get done, to do it properly. They don't have a year and 3 months. Russia's not sitting back. Russia's been recruiting all along. Russia's been building up its forces. Russia's doing the training. Russia's deploying new troops. And Russia's prepared to fight.
And it's been manufacturing weapons. Yep.
Off the charts. And it gets down to just the fundamental advantage that Russia has by virtue of being the most resource-rich nation in the world. Yeah. The United States used to be in that top 5, but we squandered our advantages there. Russia hasn't. And so the standpoint of continued manpower losses, continued equipment losses, delays that are natural from the side of the United States and the west of Europe and resupplying weapons that have been destroyed. The Ukraine's ability to hold out, I think once we're past, I guess it's May 20th, May 21st is the date that Zelensky's term was supposed to end.
Right.
But because he suspended elections, that he's no longer, he wants to continue to stay in office.
Yeah, he's illegitimate. Yeah.
At that point, he'll be viewed by Russia as an illegitimate president and then take him out.
Yeah.
They were not going to attack and kill a legitimate president. Once he's illegitimate, target is on his back. Russia's under no obligation to protect him. And I can certainly envision Russia taking out some key decision-making centers in Kiev and killing Zelensky. Because, Russia's going to have a say in what this next government of Kiev that's left over. But I don't see.
And Larry, and going back to this, President Putin at his inaugural speech talked about pretty much the same things we talked about earlier. That Russia wants economic development. It's BRICS and the alliances it's made with China, with India, with South Africa and African nations, and some parts of South America. Excuse me. Um, do you think that, well, because Russia's obviously really not interested in war at all, but America seems to be very hawkish. We have a very hawkish administration. It's hard to tell how Trump is going to be. He says he won't. In his last presidency, there was no war. So let's hope. However, he's pretty hawkish about, pretty supportive of Israel. So I don't know.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. You have APAC there, influence, right? Um, so where are we going with all of this? As the administration is about to either change or stay the same, do you think we're going to just pull back from these endless wars and the kind of almost totalitarian or fascist kind of regime we're heading towards, or not in America?
No time soon. And the only way we're going to pull back is when we get our ass kicked. All right.
Okay.
We're going to have a good old fashioned beating.
Okay.
And only then will America wake up and go, well, what the, hey, I thought we had the most powerful military in the world. And we just got wasted. That's what's going to, sadly, that's what it's going to take. Because
do you think there's going to be a civil war? Because people are talking about that in the US. And there was even that film, that film.
Yeah, there's going to be a breakdown of let's call it a breakdown of civil order.
Okay.
And isolated places in the country that will, be more independent than others.
Oh, gosh.
But that
would be Texas and Oregon and Washington.
Yeah. And
do you ever know those militias up in the Northwest? I'm telling you.
Yeah, and I live in Florida, and here, a lot of people have firearms, and you don't have a lot of crime.
Yeah,
because people don't try to break into houses; they know they're going to get shot.
Right.
But the frightening thing is, we need to not just look at Biden and Trump. When you look at the majority of the political leadership, Republican, Democratic alike, very hawkish. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah.
This black liberal man talking about, we're going to put troops into Ukraine.
Yeah.
You're crazy.
NATO troops, and they want NATO troops and American troops. Oh, yeah. That's the rhetoric. Yeah.
You've got Lindsey Graham and others, and Richard on the Republican side, Richard Blumenthal on the Democrat side, calling for stepping up the war in Ukraine, stepping up the war against Iran. Mm-hmm. So politically, they're always able to write checks that their mouths can't cash. And that's what it's going to take, is they're going to have to authorize, support, back, encourage a particular military action, and the United States is going to suffer a humiliating defeat. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's going to take place in Ukraine, or with Iran, or with China. It's going to happen in one of those places. Right. It could happen in all three places. And when I was a Fox News analyst, as I mentioned, I got fired because when I went on the Hannity and Combs show in November of 2002, I said the United States then was not capable of fighting a two-front war. We just didn't have the military resources and the logistics supply to sustain it. They pulled me off air. They didn't want to hear that. Right. But that's exactly what it turned out. We got divided and conquered in Afghanistan and Iraq. We made a complete mess of it. And then, sadly, the United States is behaving a lot like a 3-year-old kid with a hammer. Right. Everything looks like a nail. Got to hit everything. Bang, bang, bang. There's no off-ramp. Right. So, I've given one example. I said, the United States, Russia, and Iran and China and Saudi Arabia, they all share one common interest, just one. Mm-hmm. That is opposing ISIS. Because ISIS is a radical Salafist organization, Sunni-based, that is intent on destroying Iran. Mm-hmm. Well, if the United States was serious about dealing with international terrorism, we join with Iran to defeat them. But instead, what are we doing? We're basically supporting ISIS in eastern Syria, who continues to attack the government of Bashar al-Assad and to try to carry out terrorist attacks inside Iran. So that's why I say that, the biggest state sponsor of terrorism today in the world, it's the United States. It's not Iran.
Well, you're sitting in the United States and making statements like that can get you in trouble. Like I got in trouble simply for making the observation in 2019 that if Joe Biden became president, we would end up in a war against Russia. And that was before the military operation and before 2022. So I mean, and I got in a lot of trouble for saying that. So I want to ask you a question about censorship.
Mhm.
In your years working for the CIA, we all know you kind of gave a lot of really good examples of how intelligence uses propaganda or infiltrates media. And then in our case now, living in this time, social media. Um, have you seen censorship of American voices at this level? And but what I mean by that is a weaponized FBI DOJ that went after me, that went after January 6 people, that's going after the Uhuru group, who's a Black socialist group. They're on the left, who are just anti-war, and they're facing prison. They're facing 10 years in prison for violation of the Espionage Act.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? Have you seen this weaponization against American citizens like this in mass?
The last time we saw it was during the McCarthy era with the House Un-American Activities Committee, where they blacklisted people in Hollywood and they went out and attacked people as being communist stooges.
But they didn't imprison them, or they did some.
They absolutely
they imprisoned
did.
some. Yeah.
I remember Dalton Trumbull.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Who wrote
okay.
Johnny Get Your Gun? They put his ass in jail.
That's right.
Several of them got in jail. So yeah, this is America's, we've done it before and we can do it again, So
but it seems en masse. It just seems bigger.
It does. It's bigger. It's more extreme right now.
Yeah.
It is. And you've got such a large number of Americans going along with it. So that's what makes it dangerous. There's several of us that at one point, we were welcomed on regular media, no longer.
Yeah.
Doug McGregor, Scott Ritter, Ray McGovern, myself, was sort of the prominent few. Hell, even Matt Taibbi, he's getting shut down.
Yes, he is. He used to be very mainstream. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they let him on and can't have him on because he's subversive. The reason they don't want us on is we're persuasive. When people hear us talk and listen to the facts, it's persuasive. It's not
hyperbolic. Right.
That's what makes us dangerous. We're dangerous from that standpoint. So that's why I focused on keeping my blog, Sonar 21. I can post on Patreon. I can post on Substack. I used to write for the Gateway Pundit, but candidly, they're not interested at all in taking an objective look with what's going on in Israel. They're, I think, beholden to pro-Israeli Zionist money,
right?
And they don't want to jeopardize that as a funding source, and that's their call. I mean, I like the boys, or Jim Hoff now just by himself, but.
It's interesting. INN is an independent news network. They're a bunch of volunteers. Like, I don't get paid for my podcast. And none of the people that do the podcast that help out they're all volunteers and have been volunteering for years. So Reef, big shout out to him, and Greg, who did the graphics, and to Indy, who gets it up on all the platforms, because we're going to be on Rumble, YouTube, Twitch, all of those platforms. And when they go through this, I mean, we go through a lot of problems with me getting shut down. Of course, I got demonetized on YouTube immediately. Some of my videos get taken down arbitrarily if I say certain words or certain topics. But it just seems like with all of these platforms, and yours, obviously, we'll have these down below so people can find you. Our audience can find you and ask you questions and find out more. But are you on X at all? Are you on Twitter, now known as X?
Yeah, I've got a Sonar 21 Twitter account.
Okay.
But
I'll make sure and
it's pretty small. It hasn't grown much.
Well, I'll tag you. Do you Do you feel like, well, you know what's happening to me. Like, you know that I'm facing it. Like now I have this lawsuit that I filed against the FBI and DOJ. And the only answer I've gotten, by the way, is the FBI sent a letter last week to my attorney saying that they're reviewing the request for the FOIA and we'll get back about the request.
Yeah, yeah,
So we're moving really slowly.
yeah. That's how they play it.
Yeah.
I can,
So my grandchildren will probably know what happened with my FBI files and wiretapping and all that.
well, I know that Ty Clevenger, who was filed a case against the FBI on behalf of Ed Batowski and some others.
Yeah.
FBI has repeatedly lied. They've had the lies have been exposed. Then they've, because they initially said they had no information about any communications with Seth Rich. And then all of a sudden they had okay, we got 8 documents. And then all of a sudden, okay, we got 60,000 documents. It's going to take 80 years to go through them.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's Seth Rich for the audience members that are, that may not know. He worked for the DNC and was murdered on the street. He was shot down and his murder was not really properly investigated.
Yeah. Well, what's really, and not to get us off topic, but
no, go for it.
The telling indicator there is the FBI's counterintelligence office branch was involved with the investigation.
Oh, okay.
How many murders in Washington, D.C. get the FBI's counterintelligence arm involved and communicating back and forth with the Washington field office about it?
Right.
It doesn't happen unless there's a foreign angle. There was a foreign angle in this.
Interesting. And time will tell what that is. And, I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. I feel like that, Seth Rich, I almost want to do an episode on that. So maybe I can have you back. We'll talk about geopolitics, but I'd like to do a deep dive on that case because it's kind of gotten shuffled under the carpet, if you will.
Yeah. We're happy to do so. I got quite a bit of information about it. I was involved with the legal proceedings on it.
Oh, cool. Okay, great. So let's plan on doing that. And I know my audience will tune in for that because that was a tragedy. And again, it's just another example of how, a weaponized intelligence community can do damage when they have that much power, right?
Well, when the short story of it is when the CIA discovered that Seth Rich had sold the DNC emails to WikiLeaks and to Julian Assange, that they created online personality called Guccifer 2.0 to take credit for it and to portray it. They used Guccifer 2.0 to create a Russian trail of evidence. So, I mean, they made it try to appear like it was Russian. And this was we later discovered through another leak to WikiLeaks about the Vault 7, all the crypto, all the cyber warfare tools that the CIA had developed, and out of that Vault 7, that's where some of this was generated. So, yeah, it's a pretty involved story. Happy to tell it.
That would be really fascinating. Well, thank you, because I definitely want to have you back on. And now you watched the Russian election. There was international observers that were here that I met with, since Cynthia McKinney. I met with Adrian. He's actually a city councilman in Australia that they've tried to unseat because he found that he liked the Russian elections. He was talking about how organized and it had integrity or whatever. And anyway, they didn't like his comments in Australia and they tried to unseat him. So you have a lot of international pressure. I mean, I personally know of a young journalist who, out of Germany, on Lip, who basically was her bank accounts were shut down and she was threatened with 3 years in prison just because she reported from Donbass accurately.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of this freedom of speech kind of or fascism moving in that direction. So one of the things that you have in common, by the way, with Tucker Carlson is you've both been fired from Fox.
Yeah.
Have you ever?
He made more money than me, by the way.
Yeah. Have you ever spoken to Tucker, or have you ever been had the pleasure of doing that?
Yeah, we've communicated.
That's cool. Yeah, because that would be a great. I would love to see you on his new independent channel that he has, like independent media now. And what are your plans now? Are you going to think about doing any kind of bigger projects more than your blog, or what?
Yeah, I'm gonna start doing I think a weekly podcast called Countercurrents,
Okay.
and that will be hopefully we get that started. I'm hoping to do the first show with Alexander Dugan, because he's been on some podcasts, but nobody's really drilled down to say, okay, let's find out your life story. How did what was it like being a dissident against the Soviets? And now all of a sudden you're described as, Putin's brain, even though he's not. And
No, he's not, but he
and
is very interesting.
yeah, no.
And then Daria Dugina, what happened to her was just tragic. I mean, that was just horrible. I can't imagine the pain he must, because I have a daughter. So I mean, I just the pain. I met his wife actually.
I have
doing a presentation. She's really wonderful.
I was with him in both December and in February.
Mhm.
So, I've had the privilege of meeting with him on several occasions and chatting. Yeah, his wife's a lovely woman.
Yeah.
And I liked Alexander a lot. I thought he very reasonable. He's not a crazy nut.
No, he's both of them are very, very, nice.
He's an academic.
Yeah.
He's an academic, a thinker, a philosopher. So,
and he knows a lot about history. He's a tremendous wealth of, just like you are, tremendous wealth of knowledge. And there's so many questions I still have, but one final question, and then I'll I know you've already spent a lot of time with us tonight, but one final question is this. You hear politicians say that some politicians that want to garner public attention, that the CIA and FBI should be dismantled.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. They need to be torn apart,
Okay.
burned to the ground, start over. What is needed, and it's probably a hopeless ideal, is an actual intelligence organization that collects intelligence, human intelligence as well, and that is independently analyzed, but that's able to integrate both everything that's out in the social media world with that's in the classified world. Covert actions need to be completely divorced from that intelligence activity, because too often the priorities of the covert action overtake the task of doing objective analysis. And, we saw that when I was working as the Honduran analyst during the Central American Wars, the Contra War in particular. The priority for the Directorate of Operations, the DO as it was called, was to have this successful campaign with the Contras. Yet my attempts to properly analyze that and point out that the Contras were inadequate and incapable of accomplishing what was being declared as their mission created real conflict and pushback from the DO. And so that's one of the dangers, that when covert action takes precedence over intelligence collection, you're going to end up getting a skewed picture of what's going on. So, and the same with the FBI. FBI is completely out of control. They've become a political police. That's all they are. Now they've got, there are still a lot of very good men and women in the ranks.
Yeah.
But they're watching with horror what this politicized leadership has pulled off.
Yeah.
And it's detrimental to the United States. They've been engaged with political dirty tricks.
Yeah.
So, it's and I, candidly, I recognize there's a potential risk. They can come after me at some point. They'll find some trumped up charge to use, and I don't. I'm approaching 70 years of age, and I'm not really keen on having to flee for asylum to Russia, but I'd do so in a heartbeat. Because I liked a lot more what I saw in Russia than what I'm liking seeing back here, just in terms of the cultural environment and the values of society.
It's actually really, I mean, the standard of living is much better. If you're middle class, I'm not a wealthy person. And if you're, so if you're coming from the United States as a person that's not wealthy, this is, you have a much better standard of living. There's so much possibility,
Yeah,
innovation, so much
yeah,
happening. It's dynamic and it's also very safe. I mean, and I'm a woman walking around at night. I don't have to worry. Or even the fact that I'm a foreigner, you know how like sometimes in European cities you have to worry about being mugged or you have to worry in
right,
US
right.
cities being robbed.
Yeah,
I don't worry about that. In fact, I
yeah,
dropped my my bank card, and someone chased me down the street to give it to me here in
yeah,
Moscow. Like they're very kind and I've never had any problems. I'm sure, it's a major city. There's crimes, right? There's, millions of people that live here, but I, it's not like New York. It's not like San Francisco. And I'm not saying that to be, because I'm very much, and people have called me and you've seen this, a traitor and like whatever. I'm not, that's a silly word. I love America. I love being American, but I don't love the elites that have run it amok and run the economy
yeah,
into the ground.
yeah. No,
And I don't like
it's
what happened to me. I was assaulted by the US sitting US president when he was a senator, and I couldn't get any justice. So I have a
yeah,
right to be a little pissed off.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I think that it's interesting that people go after me so hard, but then you have like E. Jean Carroll or Stormy Daniels, and they're given, perfume lines and Vogue covers. And I'm like basically driven out of my own country.
Yeah. Well,
Um, yeah.
when you're being effective, you catch more heat.
Apparently. But what I was going to
Yeah.
say about Moscow is that, yeah, it's a very safe, very efficient, very clean, the metro system. But, when you go back to the United States, have you had any problems? Have you been,
No,
or you just able to come back and forth?
yeah, so far, no problems, but knock on wood. I hope that continues
It
because
should. You've never committed any crimes. You're a
well,
good American and you just have opinions.
what I strongly believe is that the United States and Russia are natural allies, and
Yes.
that we complement each other in many ways in terms of the values that embody Russia right today are
Mhm.
still resident, albeit below the surface here in the United States. By the way, did you hear the stupid, the utterly stupid thing that um, Karine Jean-Pierre said today?
No, I did not. I didn't see the White House press briefing today.
Okay, so let me pull this up because this was truly
I'll
astonishing.
have Reef play it when I send when the producer. So if you can send me the clip, that would be great. But
Uh,
what did she say now?
uh, so
She
she
is
was asked
colossally stupid.
she was asked a question about World War II, about how basically how can we be supporting the Ukrainians when there are those Nazi elements?
Oh wow.
And she goes, "We're supporting Ukraine just as we did in 1945 when Ukraine and the United States were fighting against Hitler and the Soviet Union."
What?
Yeah, yeah,
Do you remember the quote by John Kennedy about the Soviet Union, that Soviet Union lost, that we owe a debt that's so great that we would never be able to repay the Soviets for the victory that they had over the
yeah,
Nazis.
yeah,
Remember that quote? I
yeah,
don't have it over my head exactly, but it was just like, we owe such a debt of gratitude we can never repay. It was something to that nature. Yeah.
yeah. It said
She
that
doesn't
World War,
remember that the Soviets fought the Nazis, and the Soviets were the ones that were successful, and the Ukrainians were the Nazis.
right. Yes, let me see. See if you can you hear this?
No, but I'll have Reef play it, and I'll listen to it. Send it to me, and I'll play
Okay.
it.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
I will
But
forward this to you. It'll forward to you on Telegram because
yeah,
it's
and I'll make sure that it's in our cut when they put it up. I just it blows my mind. It blows my mind how they rewrite history. They're literally rewriting history, or she actually believes her own propaganda. I don't know which is worse.
well, just to be this stupid. I mean,
Yeah,
good God, stupidity on parade. Uh,
yeah.
but she literally said it was the Americans and Ukrainians who fought together against Stalin.
Now, did any of the journalists push back?
They were sitting there open mouth. And no, apparently not. Nobody said, "Oh, what the hell are you talking about?"
Exactly. Like she just rewrote history.
Unbelievable.
Anyway, we don't have the sharpest tools in the shed right now in the White House. That's for sure.
Dull.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And I hope that I get to see you the next time you visit the East.
I would look forward. I would look
way.
forward to that. Yes.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
and yeah. And I just really appreciate your time and thank you for everything and all your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and you'll be seeing us next week. And you can look below and find all of Larry Johnson's links and ways to contact him if you have further questions. And we'll see you next time. Have a good night.